Friends, hi. This is Raman again to continue with part 2 of my series of talk on Hinduism, Indian philosophy, and of course, answering readers' questions. Thank you for viewing the earlier episode, and I find, and my children tell me that it was received well, taking into account the number of views the video has been made. And for the convenience of those who have missed out on Facebook, though you can access it in Facebook, I have uploaded the video to YouTube as well. You can also watch the video at my YouTube channel at Ramanan50. Well, to continue with what we would like to do today, on this talk is on the auspicious occasion of Lord Subramania's Vaikasi Vishaka. Let me say a few words about Lord Subramania. I have written quite a number of words on Lord Subramania, who is also our family deity. Lord Subramania is called Murugan in Tamil, and also there is a legend that he was also called Skanda, but scholars also say that Skanda is different from Murugan and Subramania. Now, to the point at hand about Lord Subramania, first of all, let's understand the term Subramania. The Subramania can be split into two words in Sanskrit, Subramanya. Brahman, the one who realizes the reality, Brahman, is called Brahmanan. In regional language, they call it, in Tamil, they call it as Brahmanan. In Sanskrit, it is called Brahman. One who has realized Brahman is called Brahman. Then you call it as a Brahmin. When you add the prefix su to any Sanskrit word, it becomes auspicious. When you say Subramanya, he is the highest among Brahmins. Means he is higher than anybody who has realized the reality Brahman. That is the name of meaning of the word Subramanya in Sanskrit. When you compare it with the Tamil word Muruga, in Tamil Muruga means Alagu, that means beauty. And he is eulogized, he is portrayed as the personification of Tamil language itself. I will be devoting 2 or 3 lectures on Lord Subramania alone, taking references to Sanskrit, temples all around India, and also with special reference to Tamil and his worship. Now, one important information about the temple of Subramania, the oldest temple of Subramania, which has been found and verified by archaeology, is near Mahabalipuram, Tamil Nadu. It's about 7 to 8 kilometers from Mahabalipuram on East Coast Road. The name of the place is called Saluvan Kuppam. And this temple has been dated to 350 BC, which means it's about 2,400 years old. This has been verified by archaeology. It came to be known to people after the tsunami struck Asia in the year 2004. After the tsunami receded, in the year 2005, people were able to see some of the remains near the coastal region abutting Mahabalipuram near Tamil Nadu. And one such place was Saluvan Kuppam. This is the place, the oldest temple of Lord Subramania has been found. This place had 2 tiered construction. One was the one which was built during the period of Pallavas, which came later, say around 10,000, Narasimhavarma Pallava, that period. It comes a little later when you compare to other regions of Tamil kingdoms. This, beneath that, was found another structure, that is what has been excavated now, was a temple dedicated to Lord Subramania with a sanctum, and also his mount was found, and also his Trisul was also found. Unfortunately for us, the Trisul has been vandalized in the year 2009. And this is how we look after our treasures. And all the while people are saying that where is the proof, where is the proof. Whatever little proof we try to get with a lot of difficulties, we do not preserve them. Whom to blame? I don't know. I think it is for us to do that. And the second point I would like to make on Lord Subramania, a rare temple. That too a temple in Gujarat near Vadodara, where a Shiva temple submerges in the sea, coinciding with low tide and high tide every day. So, the timings for darshan is declared by the temple authorities based on the 15 tithis. The tithis are based on the movement of the moon. All the 15 tithis on each day, the temple, submerged temple, comes back, where people can go and visit it. You can easily go, there is absolutely no issue. The temple is located, it is called Stambeshwar Shiva's temple. It's about 52 kilometers from Vadodara, Gujarat. This temple is reported to have been built by Lord Subramania in honor of his father, Lord Shiva. Having said these two information on Lord Subramania, let me proceed on to something more important. Not more important, something more relevant to people who are listening to some of the practices of Hinduism. People might be aware, especially in pious families, those who follow our religious dictums, we have a process called chanting the Karna Mandra. Karna Mandra. That is, there are 40 samskaras. The duties are to be performed by an individual in one's whole life. These are called samskaras. So samskaras can be loosely translated into English as rites of passage. Rites, R-I-T-E-S. These are the things you're supposed to do when you go through life. Life is but a journey. So when you have to pass through the journey, you are expected to follow certain procedures. These are called samskaras. These samskaras start from Garbhadana and it ends in Preta Samskara. Garbhadana starts from the day when one gets married and ends with our body being consigned to flames. Now, this I will be dealing separately. I will give you a list of what are the 40 samskaras, when has to be done, how it has to be done, the significance of the mantras and the meanings of the mantras. All these 40 samskaras have to be followed by everyone. It's not restricted to one community as most people want you to believe so. That is incorrect. Now going to samskaras will be a lengthy one. Let me talk about the Preta samskaras. That is, after a man ceases to exist, when his body, life ceases, when someone dies, his sharira, after how body is lying in state, after that it is being consigned to flames. Before that, when somebody is in the last stages of life, and when somebody knows that he is about to die, most of the time you have times it may drag for days and months or years also. Sometimes, to be on the safer side, when someone feels that the end is very near, it is ordained in Hinduism that one has to administer the Karna mantra. The Karna mantra is a mantra that is to be recited of the one who is about to leave his body, and it has to be administered by his eldest son. The procedure is the one who is about to leave his body is to lie down on the left thigh of his eldest son, and the mantra is to be chanted in the right ear of the one who is about to die. This has to be chanted by the eldest son. In Sanskrit, Karna means ear. The mantra is to be chanted in one's ear. That is why it is called Karna mantra. Many of us would have heard of it, but many of us may not know what that mantra is, where it is from. This mantra is from Srimad Bhagavad Gita, from chapter 18, sloka number 66. One of the beautiful description of Bhagavad Gita was given by Sri Satya Sai. People might have been writing pages and pages of commentary on Bhagavad Gita, and if one were to ask somebody, can you please summarize what Bhagavad Gita teaches? And what is it about? And Sai Baba, Puttaparthi Baba, makes a beautiful and pertinent observation in stating that if you want to know what Bhagavad Gita is all about, take the first word of the first sloka of Bhagavad Gita and the last word of the last words of Bhagavad Gita. When you join this, you get to know what Bhagavad Gita is all about. What does the first sloka say? Dharma kshetre, kurukshetre, samaveda yudhstavaha, mamaka pandaka chaiva kimakaruta sanchaya. The first word is. Then what is the last sloka? Yatra yogeshwara krishno, yatra partho dhanukdaraha, tatra trividiyo bodhik dhruvanetir matir mama. What is the last word? Mama. Now, you combine this word dharma, mama. That is mama dharma. What is my duty? Bhagavad Gita explains what your duties are. That's all what Bhagavad Gita is. What a beautiful explanation. Now, in that Bhagavad Gita, in the 18th chapter, Bhagavan Sri Krishna has been explaining for whole 17 chapters and up to 65 sloka, he has been explaining all the facts pertaining to Hinduism, duties to be performed, Sankhya Yoga, Vibhuti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, then Sharanagati, and also Advaita. After having explained everything, he finally conveys one message to Arjuna. What is that? That is today being used as Karna mantra, which believed to guide the departed soul towards moksha, or in the case of Vaishnava's belief, to reach the lotus feet of Lord Sriman Narayana. What is the sloka? That sloka, which is called Karna mantra, is run thus. Yasya mam eva sharanam braja aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma sucha. The gist of this sloka is that Arjuna, you leave all the dharmas which you have been and take refuge in only me. I will guide you. I will relieve you all of your sins and then grant you moksha, that is, release from the bondage called birth and death. So, this in essence comprises of a bhakti yoga. Whatever one does in life, by way of jnana, Raja Yoga is physical and mental exercises. Then Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, these three yogas, whatever you might do, ultimately you have to reach the lotus feet of God, and that too the lotus feet of Sriman Narayana. He is called the Adhipati of Apara. So people who know Sanskrit and who are following the mantras at home, they will know whenever some inauspicious occasions occur like death, in your sankalpa you will say Sri Govinda Govinda Adya Brahmana Dvitiya Pararte Svetavaraha Kalpe. When it is an auspicious occasion, in the case of people who worship Shiva, Sri Parameshwara Prityartha. In the case of people who worship Lord Narayana, they will not use Govinda Govinda because he is Apara Sriman Narayana. So, Lord Krishna guides Arjuna, this is the path to salvation by taking refuge in Lord Sri Krishna. Now, there is a beauty in this composition as well. If you look through the entire Mahabharata or Bhagavad Gita or any of the original Lord's Krishna, you would never find Lord Krishna addressing anybody as Sucha. Sucha means Sucha is a term of endearment in Sanskrit addressed to lovingly a child, that to one's own child. Krishna has never done it towards anybody, including his son. He has not done it towards his grandson, towards this. But whereas he addresses Arjuna thus, Sarva Dharman Paridyasya Mam Raja Aham Sarva Pabebhyo Moksham Yisyami Ma Suchaha. So this has been conveyed to Lord, by the Lord to Arjuna with utmost compassion. This is what Karna mantra, that is the death chant of Hinduism. So, having said this, I'll go to the next segment of what we are going to speak. The next segment is on seeing some of the comments. This is a follow-up of some of the comments which I had left during the last talk because the time was running short. Now, what is that comment relating to? And this comment has also appeared in as a the comment, the questions that have been asked have also appeared as a sort of follow-up comment in for the video which we have done last time. Now this comment reads as under. Let me tell you, it's about 4 or 5 serious questions, of which I have addressed only one. I have addressed only one question. Then now let me go to the other question. The first question is I was asked this: what religion is Hinduism or any religion? It is not constant; it evolves. Regarding evolution of Hinduism and what religion is about, I have already spoken to that. And also there was a question asking me to say which was the period when Hinduism was its peak and when it got degraded, and what are the different attributes of yoga which I have addressed. Now, and when the temple system started in India. Now, I have addressed it. Anyway, there is still more to be addressed. I'll keep on expanding on that as days go by. The second question is that who are the people who came from Central Asia and destroyed Sindhu Valley civilization? What they call themselves, and what was their language, religion? So, for this question, the question assumed that there was an invasion to the places in India by those people called Aryas. First of all, the very term Arya means one who is flawless, that's all. It doesn't belong to a race. For example, if you look at Bhagavad Gita, you will find Arjuna being called as Arya. Anarya Jushtam Akirtikaram me Arjuna. Anarya means who is not an Aryan, who is with flaws. One who is a cover. Right? So, Arya is only Arya is one of the attributes of human nature. One who is valorous, one who is bold, one who is brave. It doesn't address a particular race. And there is no invasion when you look at the history. There is the Aryan invasion theory has been proved wrong. Number one, biologically, genetically, and DNA. If I have to explain on each one of them, it will take at least 1 hour on each subject. DNA proof relating to religion, proof related to the text and history of the people who have been quoted. For example, Scythians, a reader has quoted, Parthians. These cultures have come from Central India. The Central Asia people are those people, that is the area that's slightly north of Iran, the Central Asians, Parthians. These Parthians have descended from Iran, Iranians have descended from Sanatana Dharma, and some of them descended from Tamils, to surprise everyone. And the second second reference has been counted as Scythians. Scythians are the people who have existed. This civilization existed somewhere near Eden, somewhere north east of Eden. Now, near Eden, Yemen. Now, today we have found, archaeologically they have found a city called Karna city, K-R-N-A, Karna, Mahabharata Karna, and their roots are also, and they are the precursors to Mesopotamian civilization also. I have traced their history to Tamil. I have written special articles on Scythians and Parthians as well. Those who want to get more details on this, kindly Google Scythians Ramanan 50 or Parthians Ramanan 50 to get to know more details on this. So that doesn't mean that they have come under here they have invaded India and there was an invasion. There was no Aryan invasion. So then what were these people? What had happened? Originally, when you look at any history of any country in the Western Hemisphere, you will find that. Please go and check the history. There were some people there. There are some people living in a particular, for example, in what you today call Germany. There are some local people who are living there, and there was a wave of migrants coming into that place. They mixed with the local people and they interacted with each other, and the history starts going. And the funniest thing is, this happens with all the civilizations which have been talked about, whether it is Mesopotamian, whether it is Sumerian, whether it is Assyrian, whether it is Aztecs or Mayans. Now, the most interesting aspect of this is that whenever they say that there is a migration, there was a corresponding natural calamity in the southern hemisphere. When you say that people have come, where have they come from? The references point out to the people who have migrated from Asia. From there people have migrated. After a later period, something went wrong there in those civilizations, they had also come back. And people have to also remember that ancient landmark which we are talking about, we are not talking about 200 years or 300 years history. We are talking about thousands of years of history. Please remember, when you are reading about Indian history or geography, taking reference to the Puranas and Itihasas, please remember the landmarks as we find them today was not the same at that point of time. But it's a different matter how Valmiki or Vyasa have described the flora and fauna of each places in those texts, and they exactly tally with what we are even finding it today. Please check up my site at ramanan50wordpress.com. Now coming to this point. Now, another point, what people, in another point people always try to say, in an Aryan invasion theory, people have invaded South India, Dravida. Dravida are the people, indigenous people have come and then ruled over them. What sort of nonsense is this? Do these people know what history is about? Do they at least know what the term Dravida means? Or if they don't know, what they can do, the people who call themselves as very learned, if they want to make some sweeping statements about their own motherland, why don't they go and read Strabo, Pliny, Megasthenes, Arrian? Please find out what exactly do they talk about when they say Dravida or Tramila. In some places they call it Tramila, Dramila. Dravida in Sanskrit means one who south, that's all. The land, Dravida means it is a geographical point. Just as people in North India call anybody down Madrasi. The fact is, you may be from Bangalore, you speak Kannada, maybe from Hyderabad you could speak Telugu, or from Kerala, Malayalam, but as far as they are concerned, those above from Vindhya and Satpuras, those everybody calls anybody from down Vindhya and Satpura as, or as a general group, South Indian. Similarly, people from South, they call anybody, for example, even Bangalore, they call everybody as a North Indian. So, similarly, for the people who have been in North, that is the area beyond Vindhya and Saurashtra like we have today, people used to call anybody from the down as called as Dravidas. And they did not have much of an interaction as close as we would have expected them to have with them. At the same time, they were not at variance with them, the Dravidians. The Dravidians, the group, the whole civilization has a hoary past with Chera, Chola and Pandya. Most of them trace their ancestry to solar or lunar dynasty. Solar dynasty are Surya Vamsa, Cholas attribute themselves, and some of them, Cheras also attribute themselves. Pandyas, some of them attribute themselves to this dynasty, Surya Vamsa, and most of them attribute themselves to Chandra Vamsa, that is lunar dynasty. Lunar dynasty is headed by Ila. Today you find the name touted, Eelam, Tamil Eelam. Where does the Tamil Eelam comes? The Eelam term comes from the word Ila, the daughter of Vaivasvata Manu, who was the father of Ikshvaku, who was the founder of Ikshvaku dynasty, ancestor of Lord Sri Rama. And the Ikshvaku dynasty is also called as Surya dynasty or Surya Vansha. The daughter, Satyavrata Manu, as we call it as also Vaivasvata Manu, is from south, that is Dravida. He hails from the place near Madagascar. The reference here is from Bhagavata. In Bhagavata Stotra, we have straight reference to Vayvasvata Manu having born in South India, that is near Madagascar, and he meditated. I'll be dealing exclusively on the proof existing as to where Vayvasvata Manu meditated. When you say Dravida, doesn't mean it is like somewhere between Chennai and Kanyakumari. No, it lay further down south near Madagascar. He had a daughter called Ila, and she married Chandra. Their progeny was Bhuta. From him, Pururavas, the Chandra Vamsa, Ila Vamsa came. So, and you will also find there have been intermarriages between Chandra Vamsa and Surya Vamsa, because even today it is being practiced in Indian communities. The marriage between uncle's son, aunt's daughter, or aunt's son and uncle's daughter. This is the normal procedure among Hindus being done. So that is how it has happened. Now when these two dynasties came, so there were not, the South Indian or what we call the Dravidian kings were not at war at all with the Aryavarta. Aryavarta is the correct term, the place where the people who worshipped fire were living. The Dravidas were called Dasus. That is, the people who did not worship fire. The Dravidas, even though their religion, their faith systems did have a theistic origin, in fact, it had its own parallel to Advaitic concept of the Vedas. It has a hoary past. It runs parallel to Sanatana Dharma. They never worshipped fire. But they worshipped Indra, Krishna, Varuna, Durga, and of course Subramanya, and above all Lord Shiva. And I'll deal with the Tamil way of worshipping and the way they divided the land into 5 land masses, how they've allocated the subjects to be spoken, what is being spoken, and what are the gods that belong to that areas, and what are the producers, what are their customs and manners, what are the styles of living in a separate talk. That will approach 5 or 6 lectures of 1 hour each. That's the issue. But the point I am trying to make out is, accepting the fact that the Dravidians did not worship fire, they worshipped other things as the other deities I have mentioned. And Lord Shiva, when you look at the Shiva legend, I would not say, when you say legend, don't think it is a myth. It's not a myth. Let me deal with Shiva in detail. Shiva is too huge a concept to be even covered in 1 year. In Shiva, the concept of Shiva is much more detailed in South India than in North India. And comparatively speaking, you will find more South Indian temples designated for Lord Shiva than what you find in North India. Right? Now, this again straight away proves you that the Dravidians were not against Sanatana Dharma. To give you more proof on this, of course, I am just trying to condense whatever I have written in each subject, about 10 or 15 articles. I am trying to give you a hint so that you can follow it up by going through, because it has a lot of supportive evidence. I do not write anything on my own without quoting references. I just don't like writing something which is not backed up with research. At the end of every article, I provide the source. You can go to that particular link and verify the information which I have provided to your satisfaction. If you need, you can cross-check also. Now, as far as this Arya invasion theory, the next aspect is the South Indians Dravidas did not follow the Sanatana Dharma practices. But again, here you will find a paradox. Even though they did not worship fire as such initially, they did worship. This has been proved by Sangam Tamil classical literature, where it is very clearly mentioned that a king was called Udiyan Sheraladan. Udiyan, Sanskrit in it comes from Udaga. Udaga means stomach. Udiyan Sheraladan. He is a king who has been referred to as the one who has fed both the Kaurava and Mahabharata armies during the Mahabharata war. A separate poem is dedicated to him in Tamil Sangam literature. And he has also donated lands to Brahmins with the stipulation that he would, on rising in the morning, check whether the smoke from the Agnihotra spirals towards the air from the Brahmin Agrahara. If it doesn't rise, the grant remains cancelled. Later, in the later areas, later period, Karigal Cholan also, the Karigal Cholan had built Kallanai, man-made dam in the world. Many of us are not aware of it. Man-made dam with stone. That is the reason why it is called Kallanai. It still stands near about over 1,000 years, and it has been built. And that Karigal Velavan. Velavan is the surname Cholas grant themselves to. And he has also granted lands for the propagation and follow of Vedic precepts. And the kings, Madurai Meenakshi's father, he was called Saranga. He took part in the Mahabharata war on the side of Pandavas, and he fought with such great valor, and he had made even Ashwatthama pass. This reference you can find it in Mahabharata. Similarly, you find a lot of references to other kings from south. So, the whole story of saying that somebody has come from north and then they influenced us and they have dominated us, there is no proof. And I can quote from an example, another one history. There's those people who have been visiting Srirangam would have known that there is a temple by name Thiruvallarai, a temple dedicated to Lord Pundarikaksha, a form of Lord Vishnu. It's about 78 kilometers away from Srirangam. The buses are rare, you can travel by car or taxi. It will take hardly about 15-20 minutes, depending on the road conditions. Now, it is to be maintained well, that's it. But before the important information here, before I say a few words about the temple, the important information here is this temple was built by Lord Rama's ancestor, who was removed at least more than 5 or 6 generations earlier to him. Shibi was the king. He belonged to Ikshvaku dynasty and he was the ancestor of Lord Sri Rama. He built the Pundarikaksha temple in Thiruvallarai, which is near Srirangam and Trichy. And the marvel of that temple are two. The marvels are two. One is the temple has a temple tank behind the Garbhagriha. Now, it is so designed that if you take bath in one part of the tank, Those who take bath or stand on the other side cannot see you. So it is so beautifully built. If you take bath, the one who is taking bath or standing opposite banks of the tank cannot see. So in Tamil this is called Mamiyar Marumagal Kulam. That means mother-in-law and daughter-in-law tank. That is, they are at variance with each other. Playfully alluding to the fact mother-in-law and daughter-in-law do not get together. This is one aspect of that. The second marvel of this temple is that as you enter the Garbhagriha from the Ardhamandapa, that is from the entrance, you go one hall-like area, that is called the Ardhamandapa, in this temple at least, you go near Garbhagriha. The moment you enter and it is so hard. See, the temple is not, it's in a dilapidated condition, it has to be renovated, but the butter is doing a very great job despite very, very, very meager earning, very hospitable. I spent some time with him and he refused to accept money. With great difficulty I had to give him, so that these are the people who are the torch bearers of our thoughts, faith and belief system. We have to support them. We spend so much of money. We spend so much of money in watching, subscribing to OTT, going to movies, spending money on dining out. Why don't we pay to people who are the torch bearers of our Sanatana Dharma? What would happen if these people find the life so miserable and they are not being paid well? They educate their children to other professions. They have already started doing it. Many of them have made their children become auditors, lawyers, chartered accountants, many of them in the IT industry. If everybody leaves, you and I are not going to carry forward our ancient practices. So please pass before whining away, saying that these people in the temple, we are paying them money, they are extracting. No, it's worth it. Please do so. Please pass and help. Now, the information, I have digressed. See, my broadcasting is not for, any commercial purpose. It's just to share my thoughts so that like-minded people can get to know each other and find out what is great about our ancient religion. And sometimes, some of my thoughts also will come in. And it's left to you whether you would like to take them or not. Now, in this temple, when you leave the Ardhamandapa and then get to near the Garbhagriha, why the sun is scorching outside. I visited most of the temples I visited whatever I'm speaking about. The moment you enter, you will find an air-conditioned room, as if you are in an air-conditioned room. But to one's surprise, you will not find any vent or source for air to come in. Even if the air were to come in, it has to be hot because the atmosphere is hot. So, this is the greatness of the temple. Please do visit Pundarikaksha temple when you go to Tiruchi or Srirangam, Thiruvannaikaval or Samayapuram. It's worth visiting. And the ancestor of Rama, Shibi, who has built this temple, was ruling from the second capital, which lies in the northwestern province of Pakistan today. Near that place, I've written an article, Sibi, please, Sibi, Ramanan 50, you'll find the article. In that place, today, you will find Saptarishi Valley. Where does it come? It's in Pakistan. Aryan people have invaded. How does it come? If Aryans have invaded India, how is it their remains are not found here? Somebody has mentioned Central Asian people have invaded India, Scythians have invaded India, Kanishka, Huns have invaded. Huns are from Indian ancient tribes, Hunas. Now later they became German. How is it that we are not able to find any remains of those civilizations in today what we call as India? whereas we find evidence of our culture there. How does one account for Port-Baijan in Siberia, a town built by Pradyumna in honor of his father Lord Krishna? How is the drama in Russia is called Strivarsha? What do you call about, what these people have to say about Lake Baikal? What is Baikal? It's Vaikhanasa Tirtha. Please check up the records. What is Archaim? Archaim is a town in Russia. It is one city in the world which is built by Rigvedic Mandala. Rigveda, contrary to what people believe, also tells you how you should lead your life. It also describes how a home has to be built, a city has to be built. Rigveda design, Mandala city is built in Archaim, Russia. So, based on these factors and some more factors, the theory of Aryan invasion was one perpetrated by invaders to divide and rule India. And more importantly, the recent researchers prove that the ancient first man was not from Africa. The first DNA is from Asia, and that is found, it was traced to Madurai, present Madurai in Tamil Nadu. Kindly DNA Madurai plus Ramanan 50. Right? More on this, if you still want to know what about Aryan invasion, please Google Aryan invasion theory Ramanan 50, then you will find more articles to follow. Now let me go, still the time is running. We have another 15 minutes to conclude this session, 17 minutes. What I have promised is one more aspect to be covered. Two more rather. One of the most important point raised is, many people think, even my children think, that Hinduism is about going to temple, doing things which we do not even understand. For everything you say that there is God, you go to temple, you do something, everything will be all right. There is no scientific basis. And everybody has a solution straight away. It is said by healers, so we are following. But there is, and you are not supposed to question it. I am sorry, the information is correct. Whatever information, whatever practices who are following today, they have been arrived at after due deliberations and logic in India. Please don't think that whatever is being passed on to us is something which somebody passed on because they believe it. Because none of us has taken the trouble of going to our text and reading it. We tend to read what is written about our own mother tongue, our own indigenous languages, Sanskrit, through English, which is not our mother tongue, right? Do you need somebody to tell you about your mother, about your father, about your relative? Why don't we go and then check it out? If somebody says, no, Hinduism is full of nonsense, it is mythology, it is only legend, they have been steeped in superstition, who said? Have you verified the fact? How many of us know the first history was written by James Stuart Mill, who was father of John Stuart Mill? That gentleman stayed in UK, London, for 12 years, and he was given a princely sum of £1,200 in those days per year to write a history of India. He had written History of India, that is History of India, first history of India, without setting his foot outside his house. Without coming to India, he has published a book. You know what he starts? India is a barbaric country, mired in superstitious rituals. You are not even gone out of London. How dare you write that? And we accept that. Then we have Thomas Babington Macaulay, the father of one who introduced the language to India through which I am communicating today. Shame on me. And he justifies, if you want to rule over India, you have to divide the people, make them lose their respect for their own traditions and texts. How do you do that? By impose your language. The only way you can ruin a culture is by making people disrespect their language, their traditions, their faith system. Thomas Babington Macaulay did it by bringing English to the detriment of other languages, while Max Muller did so under the guise of translating Vedic texts. He openly declares, my purpose is to make Hindus disrespect their Vedas. I will keep on translating, I will plant such an idea in unexpected places that Indians will lose faith in their own text. That is what they have done. Having said this, let me tell you how this is founded. The logical system. Did India follow any logical system at all in their philosophy? First of all, India in Hindu systems, the term philosophy is never used. Best they use the term. In India, the term used for these concepts is called darshana. What is this darshana? Darshana, you go to temple, you have a darshana of Lord Venkateshwara, Lord Shiva, Lord Subramanya, or Devi. What is darshana? Darshana is a word that is very difficult to translate into English because it is an inadequate language when you compare it with such advanced languages like Sanskrit or Tamil. You just can't translate some of the words. Darshana means it's not only a question of seeing, it is a question of identifying a way of life, an approach, an attitude. Even then, I am not explaining it very clearly. Darshana does not mean a system. Darshana means what you identify with. It's not even system of belief. It's system of thoughts which you feel people who have experienced have expressed. There are 6 darshanas, as we call it, 6 systems. They are called Shad Darshana. These are the philosophical systems of India. In India, if you ask somebody, they will tell you what is your religion? I am Hindu. As I said earlier in the earlier broadcast, there is no such thing called as Hindu. The people who have been following a system of life which has been practiced by ancestors since the time immemorial, they are called Sanatana Dharmis. Sanatana Dharmis. We are all Sanatana Dharmis. That's all. So the term, okay, for common man's understanding, I am also using the term Hindu. Even in my blog site, www.ramanan50wordpress.com, I use the term so that people do understand what exactly I am talking about, or they will get confused. When we are talking about the Sanatana Dharma, we will immediately say Vedas. Vedas do not alone contribute the whole gamut of Indian philosophical system and treatises. Veda is a part of Indian treatise. The others are, but of course Veda is the fundamental. We take it as a point of reference. We have Shad Darsanas. They are called Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaiseshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. These are the 6 systems. They normally go in twin system. Nyaya and Vaiseshika form one group. Sankhya Yoga form one group. Mimamsa, it becomes Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa is called Vedanta. Now, the point of reference we have today for all these systems is the Vedas. These systems are classified taking reference to Vedas. How? When Vedas are there, as I explained in the earlier stages, Vedas were not, earlier broadcasting, Vedas were not written. They have been transmitted to us orally, and it is not a system developed by an individual. It was an experience transmitted orally to the later generations by people. That's all. So, such a system preceded everything because all of a sudden, at one physical point of time, one individual did not compile the Vedas. Right? Vedas are only compiled, Vedas are not written. Right? People say that is Usvasa, Vishwasa of Brahma. We'll deal it later. What exactly people are trying to say. It is the breath of Brahma. That is what is being said. Let us analyze it a little later. Now, for this purpose, what I am trying to say about the systems of Indian philosophy is that when people experience, try to attempt to realize reality, each one has a different approach, each one different has a different experience. The way you enjoy your food is different from the way I enjoy my food. Am I right? The way you enjoy one movie is different from the way I enjoy the same movie or a different movie. So, this is called anubhava, your experience. So, when experience are coming out in the form of Vedas, and at a later date, they were grasped on it, that's a slightly different concept. They come from Vedas. They could not have come from at one same time because people belonging to different time frame and different people, they have come and they have been transported. The people who came later, there were only two choices for them. Either they follow Vedas or they are against Vedas. They are not from Vedas. They do not follow Vedas. That is, one who follows Veda and the other one who does not follow Veda. Those who follow Vedas are called Astika. Those who do not follow Vedas are called Nastika. That's all. Now, in today's common parlance, we find that when you take Astika, you believe in the existence of God. Then he is an Astika. One who doesn't believe in the existence of God is called an Astika. No. In Indian context, taking reference to Indian philosophical system, an Astika is one who accepts the authenticity of the Vedas or accepts Vedas as a source of knowledge, accepts it as a part of its epistemology. Epistemology means the tools of knowledge is called an Astika, and one who does not is called an Nastika. Now, when you look at of these Shad Darsanas, Nyaya, Vaiseshika, Sankhya, these three, and Purva Mimamsa, four, these are called the Astika system, but they deny God. In our present definition, they are called atheist system. Whereas, Purva Mimamsa, again it is also from Mimamsa, all Mimamsa has come from Vedas, but again, they are known for their Nirishwaravada. God is not there. In the sense that personal God. But again, it has its own interpretations in trying to interpret what is said in the Vedas. Technically speaking, if you would really want to understand the real message of Vedas, the reality is principle. It doesn't have name or form. God has no name, no form. It is in Sanskrit, God is called Ishvara. Ishvara means personal God, the one you identify yourself with. This is done at a later day in yoga. Yoga is the twin of Sankhya system. The theoretical aspect of yoga is Sankhya system. You would be familiar with the term Sankhya. Sankhya means counting, principles. This you will find in Sankhya Yoga in Bhagavad Gita, where Lord Krishna explains Sankhya Yoga to Arjuna. Now, as I said in my earlier broadcasting, Nirguna, the reality, when you read all the Upanishads, no individual name is mentioned. No individual God is mentioned. What is said is, it is used, the term used are that it the four Mahavakyas, Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, Sohamasmi, Ajnanam Brahma. There is no individuality. It is wrong to say attributeless. It is to say that beyond attributes is the reality. But as the human mind finds it difficult to dwell upon something very abstract, it is very difficult. You try concentrating on zero, it is very difficult. So when you talk about something, so in Veda they follow the system, Neti Neha. See, if you want to say somebody, if you want to say, if you want to see me, if you want to describe me, how would you describe me? For one, if you want to describe me, you should have seen me. If you have seen me, you can say Ramanan is, say, he has got, he is about 5'7" inches, his color is like this, his height is like this is the way he walks, this is how he reacts, how he eats. Now you can describe. But whereas, if you are asked to describe something, you do not know, how would you describe? But still it is there, it has to be proved. Right? Now, there are certain things in life which you cannot prove. Pain, pleasure, hunger, your thoughts. Why? You can't even prove an electricity excepting by its result. Right? Right? There are certain things known by result, certain things which are known by your own perception. Certain things are known by intuition. Certain things are known by inferring, deducing. Certain things are known by comparing with others. That is similes, comparison. That is called upamana. Right? There are certain things which are known by anupalabdhi. We call that anuprapti. We also say one more in Sanskrit. I will deal with it later. I am just giving an example. Now, there are various tools of knowledge. What are the various tools? Perception, then inference, then similes, then testimony, then you have two more. Let me check, I will give you a correct definition. Arthapatti and Anupalabdhi. Arthapatti means deducing something from the circumstantial evidence, today's legal jargon. Then Anupalabdhi is something non-cognitive recognition. See, the word sounds very big, but it is very simple. If you want to prove something, when you say something is not there, that also is knowledge. So Hinduism, when people say that it is not logical, it goes to such an extent that your logic itself will kill you. Okay? I'll tell you how. Now let me sum up. What are the tools through which we know, which we gain knowledge? One is perception, that is called pratyaksha. Second is upamana, that is simile. Then third is anumana, that is inference. Fourth is arthapatti, that is what I said, circumstantial evidence. Anupalabdhi, that is recognition of non-recognized objects. In addition to that, we have testimony, Shabda. Here, Shabda means not only Veda, somebody's testimony. You have to believe somebody, right? If you don't want to believe anybody, well, it's left to you. See, if you want to know who your father is, you should listen. You should at least hear your mother say, "That is my father," or your grandfather, or some relatives, some friends. The fellows who lived in your town, the fellows, if you are born in a hospital, some fellows who have been in the hospital. I will not believe anybody, I will not trust anybody, I will not take anybody's testimony at all. Finished. Then you are born on your own. Right? Very simple. I have not seen my great grandfather. I have seen my grandfather. I have not seen my. Now let me show the atheistic aspect. Can I prove the existence of my great grandfather? I have not seen him. He does not exist. I do not believe in inference because inference deductive logic is fallacious. So I do not believe in inference. Similarly, when I do not believe in one thing by my perception, how can I accept a simile? Now finished. Intuition, I don't believe in intuition. Can you show me intuition? So, the net result you will believe nothing. I will not say believe. You will know nothing. So I don't want to know, then we leave it. Then, though controversial, let me make one point. What do you call as science? When everybody talks about scientific method, somebody asks me, what is your system of faith? What is your credibility? What is your system of faith? Is that science? Now let me ask you one simple question. What is science? What is science? You ask scientists about it. Science is a set of principles which, if tested under identical conditions, the same cause will produce the same effect. Correct? Correct. Very good. Two atoms of hydrogen, H2O, one atom of oxygen will produce water with a catalyst. Very good, very good. Science is very good. Correct? As my grandson will ask me a simple question, it has happened till this morning, Tata, will it happen tomorrow? If you are a rational man, a rational human being, your answer is, I don't know. That is the correct position. What is science? Science rests on two pillars. Law of uniformity of nature and the law of causality. What is the law of uniformity of nature? Law of uniformity of nature is the underlying principle for all your scientific treatises. That is, certain things will happen in a way it has been happening till yesterday, today will continue to happen tomorrow. That is, to put it in a very, very common man's language, the sun which has been rising in east, or that is, which appears to rise in east, will rise in east tomorrow. How? Can you give me a guarantee? Sun will, no, it will, how? What is the proof? You have inference, right? Yes, inference. It has happened so far. It will happen tomorrow. That's all. That is inference. When you talk about science, you will believe inference, right? But when you talk about philosophy, you will not believe inference. Pratyaksha, you have to see. If sun has to appear tomorrow, I should see it appearing tomorrow, only then I will believe. That means you cannot say that it will exist tomorrow, right? What is it? Huh? Second, this is your science. I am not denigrating science. I am talking about this pseudo-rationalist, pseudo-secularist who find it convenient to believe what they want to believe and justify. Right? The second, what is the principle? The second principle, one is law of uniformity of nature and the second is law of causality. What is causality? Causality is one effect is caused by something else. A thing happens because of something else. There is a cause and there is an effect. Correct? The point is, please listen carefully. I know this will become a little heavy today. But sometimes if you want to understand Indian philosophy, if you want to answer people who want to ridicule you, it is worth spending some time to understand our concepts so that you can be on a safer wicket to tell them what exactly you are talking about. No other religion can talk like this to you with this information. They give you, in Indian philosophy, they give you this. They tell you, causality. What is causality? A cause produces effect. Why we accept it? Very good. Correct? You just pass a few seconds. One cause can produce more than one effect. Shall I give you an example? Milk can give you curd, buttermilk, butter, ghee. Right? Similarly, one effect may be the effect of more than one cause. Right? One effect may be produced by more than one cause. Correct? That's all. So, how do you link one cause to another cause, which we call is concomitant variation? I will describe in the next broadcast. They call is one is called Satkaryavada, another is called no. Don't get don't get bamboozled by the Sanskrit words. It is very simple. One is Satkaryavada, which means an effect is contained in the cause. That is called Satkaryavada. That is originally propounded by Nyaya system. The other one is, that is, the effect is contained in the cause. That is, in our ordinary language, your curd is contained in the milk. Milk contains curd. Or your pot, the clay contains the pot. This is called Parinamavada. Then that is Satkaryavada. It has three divisions. One is called Parinama Vada, that is of Nyaya. Another is called followed by Ramanujacharya, Parinamavada, Brahma Parinamavada. Then there is a Vivarta. That is, I think it's too much. Let me explain. Vivarta is Adi Shankara's. It is reflected. Now I'll explain later. Okay? I'll take it exclusively for the concepts when I talk about what is Advaita, what is Dvaita, and what is Visishta Advaita. Maybe I'm going off the track, but anyway I'm finding a lot of people joining. Let me try to touch on this and then conclude today. When I talk about this, I'll explain. See, when we are talking about the systems of Indian philosophy, we are following them and fighting among ourselves without knowing what it stands for. The Vaishnavas and Saivas. Advaita is higher, Dvaita is higher, Visishta Advaita. How many people understand the terms? When Adi Shankara writes Advaita, does not Adi Shankara know Sanskrit? Why did he not say Ekam? Why did he say not two? He should have said no. Ultimately he says Brahman is real, other things are only modification. I am making it very simple. Advaita is too complex a concept, simple for people to understand. Reality is one, but he is not saying that. What Shankara says is reality is not two. Not two is not one. Correct? When I am saying it is not two, it may be 1.99 or 1.1. That is, it lies in between 1 and 2. Right? Which means it is not 0. It is not more than 2, but lies somewhere in. I will go to detailed implications later. Then Ramanujacharya says, now what is a Visishta Advaita? What is the meaning of Visishta? Qualified non-dualism. Why did he not? The great Acharya Ramanujacharya, I will report a separate episode for that. One of the greatest social reformers, thinkers, who brought the Saranagati Tattva to common man. Did Ramanujacharya also not know Sanskrit? The man who wrote Sri Bhashya? Why did he not say dualism? He said qualified non-dualism, Visishta, differentiated. That's a difference. Third, dualism. That is Madhvacharya. Why did he say Madhvacharya said two, Shankaracharya said not two, Ramanujacharya said qualified non-two. If these acharyas were born, interchange their time of existence, each acharya would have historically propounded the theory attributed to the other. Right? I will explain later this concept. Now, in Indian philosophy, the 6 darshanas, apart from Vedas, are Nyaya, Vaiseshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Purva Mimamsa, and Uttara Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa is called Vedanta. Now, Nyaya means, as I said earlier, judgmental. It postulates, it is a basis of mathematics. Vaiseshika. It is something very special. It is one thing, it's the best system available in India, which has propounded the theory of atoms. Kannada. The founder is Kannada. Sankhya. Sankhya is enumeration, numbers, theory of evolution and logic. Nobody is born today. No system is equivalent to the postulations of statements, which is not even reached by logical positivism. Before I conclude, that will be the end of my talk today, even though it might overshoot by about 10 minutes. That is Sankhya. Yoga is the practical application of the principles enumerated in Sankhya. Then Mimamsa is the expression of the Karma Kanda contained in Vedas, with no acknowledgement to Godhood, only performance of karma is allowed. Enough. Then Uttar is called the end of Vedas. That is, then you have various, the major acharyas we know today are Adi Shankaracharya, Sri Ramanujacharya, and Sri Madhvacharya. Apart from this, we have Vallabhacharya and a host of others. Okay, we will deal later. Now, before I close today, I'll just explain a few logical systems in Nyaya. One logical system in Nyaya, so that people may understand that Hinduism is not nonsense, it's totally, absolutely, brilliantly scientific, which today's logical system has not devised, including logical positivism of Bertrand Russell. People, before making a comment on Indian system, I suggest that they read the text instead of wildly making statements. I do not understand this, this is nonsense, Western system is best, this system is best. Please understand the concept and give me some time to explain. Okay, don't assume. I just can't tell people in 1 hour the entire concept of Hinduism and Sanatana Dharma, which has taken over 5,000 years to evolve. Now to the logical system enumerated by Nyaya. This is called Sabda Bhanginaya. Now I'll give you one example. Just listen how beautifully they have devised the system. Now I am showing you this is my mobile phone, right? I have just kept it here. Now, how many statements can you make about this? The question itself is going to be confusing to many people, right? As you go, you'll find. Then you will understand the greatness of Indian philosophy and Indian thought, Indian darshanas. Now, the first statement I can make, it is, that means this mobile is here because I can see it, correct? Yes. Now, people who are not in this room, for example, people who are watching me cannot see this mobile, right? Now you can see. Now can you see it? And nor my daughter, grandchildren, son-in-law cannot see this. As far as they are concerned, this mobile is not. That is, when I am seeing it, it is there. I call it, it is. It is called asti. In Sanskrit, asti means it is. One statement I have made. Second, people who are not perceiving this, the term perceiving is not correct. In Indian philosophy, you have to be very, very careful in using the term. People who are not aware of, even again, it's not a very good word to use in English. As far as they are concerned, it is not. The mobile is not there. So both statements are right. From that statement, from your statement, who cannot see this mobile is not there, correct. From my statement, it is here, correct. Two statements, okay. Third one. Now, this is a mobile which we have seen. Supposing it were to be seen, if we had to see some object which we have not seen before, we do not know. What do we say? We cannot describe it. There are certain things we cannot describe. Be it a thing, be it a thing or a thought, we cannot describe. We simply make, we cannot describe it. It is called avaktavya. I cannot describe it. I know there is something, but I cannot describe. So we have made three statements about one simple object. Now there is a combination. As far as I am concerned, it is. Sometime it will be there, an object will be there, and with reference to you, it is not also there, which means asti nasti. Then, second, the object is also there, I cannot describe it because it is beyond description. Asti nasti avaktavya. Next one, nasti. There is no object here. But this place is so empty, I cannot describe how the place is so empty. Correct? So, nasti avaktavya. So, there are only 7 type of statements you can make about any object or existence. That is, an object is there, asti, an object is not there, nasti, avaktavyam. An object is there and an object is indescribable, then asti nasti. An object is there, asti nasti, it is not there. And asti nasti avaktavyam. It is there, it is not there, it is also indescribable. Right? When you have these 3 combinations coming into 6 and plus original 1, it makes 7 statements of fact you can make on anything. Logical positivism has not gone beyond this extent, has not come anywhere near that. Apart from that, today what you find in Western logic is there are 2 systems. One is called inductive logic and the second is called deductive logic. Don't be bamboozled by words, again I am telling you. Inductive is, if somebody, you say all men are mortal, that is, one who is born will die. How do you say that why all people who are born will die? Because I have seen A, I have seen B, I have seen C, D, etc., etc. Whoever is born dies. 1, 2, 3. Go step by step and then say you make a general statement. That becomes a general statement called all men are mortal. That is, one who is born will die. So the steps you take is an induction. One by one you go, that is called deduction. Now the next step is you got a general statement. All men are born. Whoever is born will die. Right? Now I am Ramanan. I am born, I will die. Okay, all men are mortal. Ramanan is a man, therefore Ramanan will die. This is called deduction. You take an original statement, apply it to a single case, and go to a decision. Correct? Correct. With inductive logic is also a failure because when you are making a general statement, what is the general rule? Law of uniformity of nature and law of causality again applies here. When you say A is born, he dies. B is born, he dies. Up to ad infinitum, born and dies. Here comes the problem. Have we physically checked up every individual? Is there? Probably there may be somebody who is born and not dead. No, logically speaking. Have you personally verified? Even if you have verified. I say I have verified, sir, I believe. Correct. But if it has to be a scientific fact, it should be so tomorrow also. Can I guarantee that whoever is born tomorrow will definitely die? I can't say. Scientifically, I am again using the term scientifically. I cannot say. So that means inductive is at fault. Now, when you go to deductive logic also, when I say all men are mortal, Ramanan is man, therefore mortal. When the basis of arriving at a general statement is a fallacy, that is at fault, by applying the strict rule of logic, how can what you understand from that strict rule be correct? It can be wrong. That's why Indian philosophy tells you logic is a double-edged sword. The moment you extend logic, it will kill its own self. So, at a later time, I'll explain more and more about this while combining with a lot of other information. The next session will be on Sunday around at 5 p.m. If there is a change, I'll intimate you. Sunday at 5 p.m. on Facebook, and the present episode will be uploaded in YouTube also, and you can also read more about the antiquity of Hinduism, proof for the presence of Hinduism around the world, and original text translation with my comments and other experts' explanation of our customs, rituals at my site www.ramanan50wordpress.com. Before I conclude, I would like to quote the greatest intellectual giant human mind the world has produced, Sri Adi Shankaracharya. He tells you, Samprabde sannihite kale nahi nahi rakshasi uktungarane. What he says, Adi Shankaracharya is always known as the father of Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. You know what he does? After saying everything, he comes finally and then say, Bhaja Govindam, Govindam Bhaja Moolamade. Then he explains, Ma Kuru Dhanajana Yavvana Garvam, Parasi Nivesha Kalas Sarvam, Maya Mayamidam Agilam Shitva, Brahma Paramtam Sayi Viditva. This means, what he says is that at your youth, when your senses are very strong and you are youthful and full-blooded, you are proud. You know what is Ma Kuru Dhanajana Yavvana Garvam? You know you are proud because of your wealth, your pleasures, your youth. You know what will answer you? Any amount of reading. No amount of reading. No amount of lectures by anyone will prove that you are not permanent. Kala Nivesa, Parasi Nivesa, Kala Saram. Time will tell you what you are, what your life is. It goes away in a flash. Then what are you supposed to do? You talk about logic. Shankaracharya says, Samprabde sannihite kale nahi nahi rakshasi ruktum karane. What is the meaning? He says, when your last time is approaching, how does your last time approaches? Samprabde sannihite kale. Your karma palas, whatever you are deemed, you are designed to receive, based on that your end will come. Sannihite kale nahi nahi rakshasi ruktum karane. My talking philosophy, your talking philosophy, your logic will never come to you. Your help. So what are you supposed to do? Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Moodave. This, in a very simple sentence, my late friend, poet laureate, Sri Kannadasan put it in one of his greatest film songs, 2 lines. What he says in this line, then I'll translate it also. இல்லாத மேடையில் எழுதாத நாடகத்தை எல்லோரும் நடிக்கின்றோம். The song, கேள்வியின் நாயகனே இந்த கேள்விக்கு பதில் எதையா? இல்லாத மேடையிலே எழுதாத நாடகத்தில் எல்லோரும் நடிக்கணும். Means all of us are acting on a non-existing stage, an unscripted play. I repeat, all of us act in a non-existent stage, an unscripted play. Krishnarpanam. Thank you.